how desperate is the Netanyahu administration to drag the U.S. into a larger conflict in the Middle East?
Well, it's not just Netanyahu. The United States has been front-loaded to support Israel without question, regardless of the political leadership, for some time now. The last time we put the brakes on something like this was in 1990, 1991, during the Gulf War. The administration of George Herbert Walker Bush had famously stood up to the Israeli government and told them that, there's not a blank check here. But later on, under Bill Clinton, and then later on George W. Bush, and then Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and now Biden, this changed, and Israel basically was given literally a blank check. The Israeli lobby took over control of Washington, D.C. The Arab lobby was dispersed, and we now find this situation where we're front-loaded to give Israel anything they want. But I will tell you this. First of all, both Israel and the United States know that there can't be a war between Israel and Iran unless the United States is involved. We know that because we participated in joint exercises with Israel, Chariots of Fire last year, Firm Hand this year, where the various scenarios were tested out, and Israel lacks the capacity to attack Iran on a sustained basis without American assistance, and they need America to take over that conflict because they can't do it on their own. They literally can't do it on their own. And the problem is that they can initiate a strike against Iran, but then Iran will destroy all of Israel with precision-guided ballistic missiles. Not just Iran. There's a member of the Israeli cabinet, female member of parliament. She's a Likud party member. She has resigned against Netanyahu, and today she's saying that he has ruined Israel. And he has. She understands the truth. She knows the truth. That Hezbollah is sitting on thousands of precision-guided munitions. Precision-guided munitions meaning that they will strike a target within 3 meters of its intended, point of detonation. That means it's going through a window. And that these weapons are such that the Israelis can't intercept them. So if they're fired, they will hit what they're aimed at. And that will destroy Israel. She knows it. Netanyahu knows it. That's why he wants America involved. The only way he can defeat Hezbollah and Iran is if America takes the lead. That's the last thing the United States wants to do, however. We don't have the military capacity to defeat Iran. And the consequences of a long war with Iran would be devastating for the global economy because the oil production capacity of the Middle East will be terminated, some of it permanently so. We know this. Joe Biden, he wants to be president again. So he's not going to commit economic suicide by blindly supporting Israel. Netanyahu is finished. He's done. I just advise everybody, every time Netanyahu speaks, ignore it. And I'll tell you why. Because when this war ends, and it will end, Netanyahu will not be prime minister of Israel. He's a hated man, a reviled man. And he's recognized not only by the United States, but now increasingly so inside Israel, is the number one problem for Israel. It's not Hamas, it's Netanyahu. He failed the Israeli people on October 7th. He's supposed to be Mr. Security. He failed. And understand this, if he failed on October 7th, he's failed everywhere, which means he's miscalculated across the board, which means he doesn't have a plan. He simply panicked. This is panic reaction by the Israelis, which is one reason why they're committing so many crimes, because they just don't have any other thing they can do. They are so scared. They are so afraid. They are so panicked that they have allowed this panic to turn into bloodlust. And for them, it's bad. Not only does it expose them as a criminal state, but it also has turned global opinion against them. Let's be frank. Had Israel on October 8th limited its response to securing the border with Gaza, cleaning up the Hamas people, maybe a handful of punitive strikes against known Hamas targets inside Gaza, and then turned to the international community and cited Article 51, self-defense, and say, we've been attacked. We need the Security Council to step in. There would have been a heated debate because, again, the ruling of the International Court of Justice that Israel is an occupying power would have come up for debate, but Israel would have been able to counter that by pointing to the number of dead civilians and say that surely you can't deny us the opportunity to recognize that this was excessive violence on the part of Hamas. And I do believe that the Security Council would have sided on behalf of Israel, but it wouldn't have allowed this crime that's taking place. What it would have said is that Hamas must go. And then you'd have the international community working with Israel to isolate Hamas, to eliminate Hamas. The streets would have been filled with protesters protesting for Israel and against Hamas. But that's not what happened. Netanyahu couldn't let that happen because remember, before October 7th, he was already a failing prime minister. There's a prime minister whose country was turning against him increasingly because of his decision to rewrite basic law, to turn the Israeli judiciary to an extension of a Likud-controlled parliament that would impeach any judge that dared hold Netanyahu accountable for the many crimes that he's been accused of committing, crimes of corruption, crimes that if he were found guilty, and he likely would be found guilty, would put him in jail and his wife for the rest of their lives. So he's a desperate man, literally trying to destroy Israel to save himself. That shows you what kind of despicable character this is. This is not a good man. This is not a misunderstood man. This is not a man who has been caught up in something bigger than him. He is a criminal, a literal criminal who's using the Israeli political system as a shield to protect himself from being held accountable for the crimes he has committed. And now he's committed more crimes. These war crimes are on Netanyahu. This is a man who has no support, no meaningful support in Israel. And I think you're going to see sooner rather than later that he will be removed from office and a new leadership will come in. And this will be largely because the United States is putting that pressure on them, because we recognize, and we see this with cables being sent from ambassadors around the world to Secretary of State Blinken to the White House, that the United States has lost the Arab world. They won't talk. They won't listen to us. We've lost their respect. It's over. That's all because of this Benjamin Netanyahu criminal in that's governing right now in Israel. So I think we're seeing a situation where the United States has had enough of Israel's crimes, and that the United States is going to begin holding Israel to account. And the best way to hold Israel to account right now is to push Netanyahu out and get an Israeli government in that will be willing to sit down and seriously discuss how to bring an end to this violence and how to promote a lasting peace that's inclusive of the existence of a Palestinian state, a legitimate Palestinian state, not a throwaway fake Palestinian state.
If you were an advisor to the Netanyahu administration right after that attack on October 7th, what would you say to them? What would be a smart choice to respond to that attack?
Well, if I were an advisor to Netanyahu, I would say that Hamas has carried out a very effective military raid against us. And we have to ask ourselves, what were they trying to accomplish? Hamas has stated three things: the creation of a Palestinian state, the freeing of 10,000 or 5 to 10,000 prisoners being held by Israel, many of them women and children, and the sanctity of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, the Netanyahu administration is familiar with all of this because they have said, we will not allow a Palestinian state, straight up, won't allow it. We're encouraging greater Israel. We're not just refusing to have a Palestinian state. We want to eliminate Palestine altogether. They're not going to free the prisoners. And they view the Al-Aqsa Mosque as an impediment against, the next temple, the rise of the temple in Jerusalem. And so it's very hard as a military guy, but I would say that understand that this raid was designed to trigger our response, and therefore we must be in charge of our response so that Hamas isn't controlling this ship, that we are in control of this ship. So the first thing is we need to reseal the border to make sure Hamas can't do this again. We must ask ourselves, how did Hamas do what they did? And we have to make sure it doesn't happen again. Second of all, we have to eliminate any immediate threats to us. So if Hamas is launching rockets, I would authorize military strikes and to take out rocket launch sites and to take out command and control nodes if they can be identified. But the issue of distinction must come into play, as must proportionality. But then I would say that we need to find a way to understanding this, that Hamas isn't just a military organization, it's a governing authority and an ideology. And if we would learn from the Americans, we know now that you cannot bomb an ideology into extinction. In fact, the way you deal with these problems could actually enhance that ideology, strengthen that ideology. That if our goal is to weaken Hamas, we must not provide them with the fuel that will power the engine that makes them an even bigger entity. Today, Hamas is huge. Everybody's talking about Hamas. Demonstrators in the streets for Palestine, but indirectly for Hamas. They have more authority and legitimacy in the international community today than they had on October 6th. The Israelis have failed. They've done exactly what Hamas wanted them to do. Hamas took hostages, fell back into the Gaza metro, 500 kilometers of tunnels under the ground, and said, come and get us. And Israel did. And Hamas knew that Israel would use collective punishment because that is the written doctrine of Israel, the Dahiyah principle, named after that West Beirut suburb. And I'm sure I mispronounced that name and people are going to correct me. I apologize. But you know what I'm talking about. The point is, Israel did everything Hamas wanted them to do. And Hamas is winning this fight because war is an extension of politics by other means. This is a political fight. And Israel is losing the political fight. They can win all the little tactical victories on the ground that they want, but they're not destroying Hamas. They're not defeating Hamas, and they've lost politically. When you have the United States saying that Benjamin Netanyahu's got to go, you lost. When you have the world gathering around and condemning you, you've lost. So I would have told Netanyahu that we don't want to lose and that we have to view this as a political struggle, not just a military struggle. The military job right now is to contain the problem. The political job right now is to destroy Hamas. How do we do that? We do that by not playing their game. The first thing I would have done, and I've been advising the Israeli prime minister, is I would have turned to the United Nations and make an Article 51 appeal for the world to rally around our support. And then I would say that Israel is open to direct negotiations with Hamas about resolving this issue. Israel is open to direct negotiations with Hamas. That means that Israel's sitting at the table waiting, and there's a seat over there with a sign that says Hamas. And you invite Hamas to the table. Now, Hamas doesn't want to sit at that table. Hamas doesn't want to recognize Israel. And you just disenfranchised Hamas. You just delegitimized them in the eyes of the world because everybody's now looking at Hamas saying, you have to sit down, you have to talk. And if Hamas won't talk, Israel just won the political fight. And now the process comes to delegitimize Hamas and find something that can step in its stead, Fatah perhaps. And if I were the CIA, I would be encouraging a renewal of the Fatah-Hamas civil war. I would be telling the people of Palestine that Hamas can't govern. They have abandoned you. They have betrayed you. They have done everything bad against you. And it's time for the Palestinians to clean house. And I would encourage that to be taking place. There's a lot of things Israel could have done that would have maintained this. Now, for me, I'm glad they didn't because I believe in the defeat of Eretz Israel. I don't want a greater Israel, but I'm just telling you that there was a way to go about doing this, that Israel could have come out as the victor. Except Hamas knew that Israel wouldn't do that because Israel's incapable of doing that because Israel is a nation that's infused with hubris, with arrogance. The pride comes before the fall. And that's what Hamas was betting on, and it was a damn good bet. It wasn't even a gamble. Vegas wouldn't have given odds against Israel doing what they did because it's just an assured reaction, especially from a government as unthinking as Benjamin Netanyahu's. We knew what they were going to do. It was predicted, predictable. They're doing exactly this, and they're losing now because of it.
If the Netanyahu administration were capable of dragging the US into a larger conflict in the Middle East, how do you see the role of Turkey as a NATO ally?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I think nobody wants this war. Everybody's on to Israel's trick. Everybody's on to Israel's trick. So it would be the dumbest thing in the world for this thing to explode. The United States is doing unprecedented reaching out to Iran, telling them we don't want this war. And Iran is doing unprecedented reaching out to everybody else saying, we don't want this war. A lot of pressure is being put on Hezbollah, who's in a very tight situation, to manage the escalation so it doesn't explode into war. And the United States is putting pressure on Israel saying, don't you even think about opening up a northern front, which of course is an act of desperation that Netanyahu might do to hold on to power as his Gaza gambit fails. So I think we have to understand that any talk about a larger war is purely speculation. And it's, well, that doesn't mean it can't happen. Of course it can't happen. All the pieces are there. The emotions are running high. One miscalculation. My God, if one of these Iraqi or Syrian resistance missiles, mortars lands on an American base and kills 25 soldiers, not wounds, kills 25 soldiers, hell's going to come. Hell's to pay. We won't take that. And then we have the real risk of major war. But nobody wants that war. Everybody's on to Netanyahu's treachery. You know, Turkey is a NATO ally. This has nothing to do with NATO, nothing to do with NATO whatsoever. This is purely a Middle Eastern problem. And the United States is not going to go to war against Turkey if Turkey intervened against Israel. That's an Israeli problem. We will continue to provide arms, munitions, etc. But we're not going to intervene to save Israel. We're not going to put American boots on the ground. First of all, what's Turkey going to do? It's very difficult. I mean, is the Turkish Air Force going to mass its aircraft and strike Israel? That would be foolhardy because Israel has some potential to strike back. There's no common border between Turkey and Israel. Or Turkey can't send troops. Where are they going to send troops through Syria? No, they don't have good relations with the Syrians. Through Iraq, that ain't going to happen either. Through Lebanon, nope. So I think right now we just have a lot of muscle flexing by Turkey, but there's no real threat of a Turkish-Israeli confrontation. The big threat comes from Iran, and the United States is doing everything in its power to make sure the Iranians know we don't want this war. And so you're going to see we're turning on Netanyahu. We don't want him in power, and we're going to put whatever pressure we can to get him removed from power.